Elon Musk lives as a homeless man for a week. The truth he learns will break your heart. The cold wind sliced through the darkened city streets as Elon Musk adjusted the tattered jacket he'd bought from a thrift store. He blended into the night, just another shadow among the countless homeless souls lining the alleyways. The billionaire inventor had spent years solving problems on a global scale, from electric cars to Mars colonization. Yet he realized he had never truly understood what it felt like to survive at the bottom. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a social experiment. It was personal. After a late-night encounter with a homeless veteran who shared his heartbreaking story, Elon felt compelled to experience it firsthand. So, he left his wealth, gadgets, and comforts behind, armed only with a $20 bill and a simple resolve: to live as a homeless man for 7 days. The first night was an assault on his senses. The smell of garbage lingered in the air. The pavement was unforgivingly cold, and the hunger gnawed at him faster than he expected. He found a corner behind an abandoned bookstore and sat down, pulling his knees to his chest for warmth. Around him, other homeless individuals had built makeshift shelters out of cardboard and scraps. First time, a raspy voice broke the silence. Elon looked up to see an older man, his face weathered and his beard streaked with gray. He carried a shopping cart overflowing with random items. "Yeah," Elon replied honestly. The man chuckled dryly. "You'll learn fast. Name's Eddie. Yours?" "Elon," he said simply, avoiding any indication of who he really was. "Well, Elon, rule number 1. Keep your shoes close. Someone will take them while you sleep if they're worth anything," Eddie said, gesturing to Elon's second-hand sneakers. "Rule number 2. Don't trust anyone too fast. Desperation changes people." Elon nodded, taking in the advice as Eddie moved on. As the night dragged on, the reality of his choice began to sink in. The discomfort was overwhelming, and every sound, a distant car horn, the shuffle of feet, felt like a threat. Sleep was nearly impossible. By dawn, Elon was exhausted, hungry, and questioning whether he could make it through the week. Yet, as the sun began to rise over the city skyline, casting a golden glow on the crumbling streets, he felt something he hadn't expected: determination. Elon woke to the sound of muffled voices and the clatter of a trash can being overturned. The city was already alive, but for him, it felt like an entirely different world. His body ached from the hard pavement, and the hunger pangs were sharper now. He rubbed his eyes and noticed Eddie sitting a few feet away, tearing a stale bagel into pieces. "Breakfast of champions," Eddie joked, tossing a piece of bread to a stray dog nearby. The dog sniffed it hesitantly before devouring it. Elon's stomach growled audibly. Eddie noticed and handed him the last piece. "Here. Not much, but better than nothing." Elon hesitated before accepting. "Thanks," he said, biting into the hard, tasteless bread. "You're lucky," Eddie said, leaning back. "Some days there's nothing to find. You'll figure it out. The trick is knowing where to look and when to give up." Elon nodded, mentally cataloging every word. By mid-morning, he followed Eddie's lead to the back of a fast food restaurant, where leftovers were sometimes thrown out before lunch. A small group had already gathered, scouring the bins for anything edible. Elon watched as one man shoved others aside to grab the larger scraps. "You fight, or you starve," Eddie said quietly. Elon's mind raced. It wasn't just about hunger. It was about survival in a system that offered no safety net. The desperation in the air was palpable. For someone like Elon, who was used to solving problems with logic and resources, the chaos felt insurmountable. Later, Elon and Eddie wandered to a nearby park. They sat on a bench as Eddie began to speak, his voice tinged with sadness. "You know, I wasn't always out here," he said. "I had a job, a family, but one bad break leads to another, and suddenly you're here." Elon listened intently, his eyes scanning the park. Families played nearby, blissfully unaware of the struggles just a few blocks away. Eddie continued, "People don't see us. we're invisible. They think we're lazy, or that we chose this life. But nobody chooses this. Elon's throat tightened. Eddie's words painted a picture of systemic failure, one that technology and innovation alone couldn't fix. He thought of the billions he had spent on cutting-edge ideas, wondering if he had been blind to the human stories that went unheard. By nightfall, Elon had managed to gather a few scraps for dinner, but his mind was too restless to focus on his hunger. The faces of the people he had met, their struggles, their stories, looped endlessly in his thoughts. As he lay on the cold ground once more, staring at the stars above, a single thought consumed him. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a revelation. By the third day, Elon began to notice the rhythms of life on the streets. There was a grim predictability to it. Waking up sore, scavenging for food, avoiding trouble, and finding a safe spot to sleep before nightfall. Yet beneath the surface, there were layers of unspoken rules and small acts of humanity. Eddie introduced Elon to a group of homeless individuals who gathered every morning near a soup kitchen. The line stretched down the block, a patchwork of weary faces waiting for a warm meal. As Elon stood in line, a woman in front of him cradled a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. The baby's cries pierced the air, drawing attention from those around her. "Shh, it's okay," the woman whispered, rocking the baby gently. She caught Elon's eye and offered a faint smile. "First time here?" "Yeah," Elon replied, hesitating. "You?" "Been coming here for months. It's hard, but at least they don't judge you." She looked down at the baby. "This is Mia. She's all I've got." Elon's heart sank. The woman couldn't have been older than 25, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone who had endured a lifetime of hardship. When they finally reached the front of the line, Elon noticed something troubling. There wasn't enough food to go around. The volunteers handed out small portions, apologizing as they ran out of supplies. The woman ahead of him was given a single slice of bread and a cup of water. As Elon stepped forward, the volunteer frowned. "Sorry, that's it for today." Eddie, who had been further back in the line, shook his head. "Happens all the time," he muttered. "Too many mouths, not enough to go around." Elon's stomach growled in protest, but the ache of hunger wasn't as sharp as the ache in his chest. He watched as the young mother shuffled away, cradling Mia and whispering reassurances that Elon could tell she didn't believe. Later that day, Eddie led Elon to a small encampment under a bridge. It was a makeshift community of tarps, tents, and fires in old oil drums. The people there greeted Eddie warmly, sharing what little they had. "Elon, meet the Bridge family," Eddie said with a wry smile. "They've got their own little system here." Elon observed as they divvied up supplies, repaired torn clothing, and even laughed together despite their circumstances. It was a fragile but functioning ecosystem, built on mutual trust and shared hardship. One of the men, a wiry figure named Sam, handed Elon a can of beans. "Here, don't eat too fast or you'll regret it later." Elon thanked him, struck by the kindness of people who had so little. As the group talked and shared stories around the fire, Elon realized something profound. These were people who had been written off by society, yet they showed more resilience and compassion than he had seen in boardrooms full of billionaires. That night, as he lay on the cold ground once again, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Mia and her mother, about Eddie and the Bridge family, and about the staggering indifference of the world outside. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, and it terrified him. On the fourth day, Elon's body began to betray him. The hunger wasn't just a hollow ache anymore. It was a relentless weight pressing on his chest. His muscles were weak, his vision slightly blurred, and even the simplest tasks required immense effort. Yet, he pushed forward, fueled by a mixture of determination and guilt. Eddie had told him about a church downtown that served free meals on Wednesdays, but getting there meant crossing through a more dangerous part of the city. "Stick close to me," Eddie had said. "People here can smell weakness, and you're looking pretty ripe." As they walked, Elon noticed how invisible they were to the world around them. Business people rushed past without a glance, their polished shoes clicking on the pavement. Cars idled at traffic lights, windows rolled up tight. The city buzzed with life, but none of it seemed to touch him. Halfway to the church, a group of teenagers appeared from an alley, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. They spotted Elon and Eddie and approached quickly, their faces a mix of amusement and malice. "Hey, old man," one of them said, shoving Eddie. "What you got in that cart? Bet there's something good in there." "Just junk," Eddie replied calmly, gripping the handle of his shopping cart tighter. Another teen turned to Elon, sneering. "And you? Got anything worth taking?" Elon stood frozen, unsure of what to say. His mind raced, calculating the odds, but before he could answer, Eddie stepped in front of him. "Leave him alone. He's got nothing, just like me." The tension hung in the air for a moment before one of the teens spat on the ground. "Not worth it," he muttered, and the group disappeared back into the alley, their laughter fading into the distance. "You okay?" Eddie asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Elon nodded, his throat tight. He wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable, this powerless. It was a stark reminder of how fragile life on the streets could be. When they finally reached the church, the line for food wrapped around the block. Elon shuffled forward with the others, the scent of warm soup making his stomach twist in anticipation. Inside, volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, handing out bowls and bread with kind smiles. As Elon took his seat, he noticed a man across the table glaring at him. The man's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "First time here?" he asked bitterly. "Yes," Elon replied, his voice low. The man snorted. "Figures. You've got that look, like you still think this is temporary. Trust me, it ain't." Elon said nothing, but the man's words lingered. How many people here had started with hope, only to see it eroded by years of hardship? That night, as he lay on his makeshift bed, Elon replayed the events of the day in his mind. The teens, the church, the bitter man, all of it painted a picture of a world he had never truly seen before. And yet, there was still a spark of something else. The kindness of the volunteers, Eddie's unflinching loyalty, and even the shared laughter of the Bridge family reminded him that humanity, though battered, wasn't broken. By the fifth day, Elon's physical exhaustion was matched only by the emotional toll of what he was witnessing. He spent the morning with Eddie, silently gathering recyclables to sell. The two moved through alleys and parks, filling a battered shopping cart with cans and bottles. For every few cents they earned, the reality of how little it added up to became clearer. As they approached the recycling center, a young boy darted out of a nearby dumpster, clutching a handful of aluminum cans. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his face smeared with dirt but his eyes sharp and defiant. "Hey kid," Eddie called out. The boy froze, looking ready to bolt. "It's okay," Eddie said, holding up his hands. "Not here to take anything. You alone?" The boy nodded slowly. Elon stepped forward, his voice soft. "What's your name?" "Luis," the boy muttered, keeping his distance. "Where are your parents, Luis?" Elon asked. The boy hesitated, then shrugged. "Don't got any. Just me." Eddie sighed, muttering under his breath. "Another one." He pulled a small bag of chips from his cart and tossed it to the boy. "Here, eat something." Luis grabbed the bag and tore it open, devouring the contents in seconds. Elon watched, a lump forming in his throat. "How long have you been out here?" Luis shrugged again. "Long enough. I do okay." But Elon could see the truth. The boy was barely surviving. As they parted ways, Elon couldn't shake the image of Luis from his mind. A child, forced to navigate a world so cruel, with no one to protect him. Later that day, Elon and Eddie returned to the Bridge family's encampment. The atmosphere was different this time, quieter and more somber. Sam, the wiry man who had shared his beans, sat with his head in his hands. "What's wrong?" Eddie asked. Sam looked up, his eyes red. "City's sending people tomorrow, gonna tear this place down. They say it's for sanitation or some crap, but we all know what it's about. They don't want us here." A wave of anger surged through the group. "Where are we supposed to go?" someone shouted. "This is all we've got." Elon listened in silence, his mind racing. He had seen headlines about homeless encampment sweeps before, but standing here, amidst the people who called this place home, the reality was unbearable. That night, as the group huddled around the fire, Elon spoke up. "What if we fought back?" The others stared at him, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "What are we gonna do?" Sam asked bitterly. "March into City Hall with our shopping carts?" "No," Elon said. "But what if we made them see us? What if we made it impossible for them to ignore us?" His words hung in the air, sparking a flicker of hope amidst the despair. Eddie leaned in, a small smile playing on his lips. "You've got something in mind, don't you?" Elon nodded. For the first time in days, he felt a surge of purpose. He didn't know how yet, but he was determined to make the world see what he had seen. By morning, the encampment buzzed with nervous energy. Elon spent the early hours scribbling on scraps of cardboard, crafting messages that were simple, yet powerful. "We are human too. Stop ignoring us. This is our home." Eddie rallied the group, his raspy voice cutting through the tension. "We've got nothing to lose, folks. If we're going down loud." Sam, initially skeptical, now stood with a megaphone in hand, ready to lead the charge. Even Luis, the young boy they had met the day before, appeared clutching a sign Elon had helped him make. As the sun rose higher, the group moved as one, leaving the encampment behind and heading toward City Hall. Along the way, Elon noticed how many people glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Cars slowed, cameras clicked, and whispers spread. When they reached City Hall, they formed a line on the steps, holding their signs high. Elon stepped forward, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was about to say, but the words came anyway. "We are not invisible," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "We are people, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, trying to survive in a world that's forgotten us." The crowd that had gathered grew larger. Reporters began filming, microphones appearing out of nowhere. Eddie chimed in, his voice filled with anger and passion. "They want to tear down our home like we're trash. But we're not trash. We have stories, we have value, and we're not going anywhere." A few officials emerged from the building, their faces tight with discomfort. One of them, a woman with a clipboard, stepped forward. "You can't block this area," she said firmly. "We'll call the police if you don't disperse." But Elon held his ground. "Call them. Let them drag us away in front of these cameras. Let the world see what happens when the system fails its people." The tension thickened. Some of the officials whispered among themselves, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. The protesters, emboldened by Elon's defiance, began chanting, "We are human! We are human!" Luis stood beside Elon, his small voice joining the chorus. His sign shook in his hands, but his resolve was unshakable. As the minutes passed, something remarkable happened. More people joined the protest, passers-by, sympathetic citizens, and even a few employees from the nearby offices. The crowd swelled, their voices echoing through the city. Elon felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just about the encampment anymore. It was about humanity, dignity, and the right to exist without being cast aside. For the first time in days, he saw a glimmer of change. The officials retreated inside, the protest continued to grow, and the world began to notice. Elon looked at Eddie, then at Luis, and finally at the crowd. He realized this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much bigger.